there, and a warm welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Tracy Shilshi. Now, today's focus is on the Indian economy, which unexpectedly grew 7% in the October-December quarter of 2016, indicating that the impact of the ban on high-value notes in November last year wasn't as adverse as initially feared. The data put out by the Central Statistics Office, the CSO, also projected that India's real or inflation-adjusted gross domestic product, or the GDP, is likely to grow at 7.1% in 2016-17, 0.8% slower than the previous year's 7.9% expansion, enough, of course, to maintain India's position as the fastest expanding major economy in the world. Now, economists are divided in their response to the latest set of data, some saying that perhaps the data did not capture the impact of demonetization, while others say that the numbers are for all to see. However, we may like to interpret it as we wish. So breaking down those numbers and also helping us understand if 7.1% GDP growth is a realistic figure. We have in studio this evening Priya Ranjan, senior journalist, joining us here on the panel. We have Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, NIPFP member, and also S.P.Sharma, who's the chief economist with the PhD chamber. Also joining us from the capital, we have Rajiv Kumar, senior fellow of CPR and also former secretary general to FICCI. If I could come to you first, Professor, do you feel these numbers are real? Like the question we are posing, is it a realistic figure?
Well, in my view, I think it's definitely a surprise. I must say it's a pleasant surprise that we are growing at 7.1%. But most importantly, I think if you look at the press release, we have to really look at GVA at basic price is the GDP of this country, which is growing at 6.7%.
Yes.
Compared to 7.8% last year. So in that sense, there is a decline by 1.1 percentage point compared to last year. And again, if you look at these numbers, I was never a believer of quarterly GDP estimates anyway, even before the CSO revised the GDP numbers. But if you look at this, particularly the second paragraph of the press release, they clearly say that these numbers are driven by extrapolation method, which is something called benchmark indicator method, where they depend on 7 or 8 indicators, and it's been used to extrapolate most of the GDP components. So in that sense, it is still a forecast.
Yes.
And most importantly, if you look at the biggest driver of GDP numbers that we have seen yesterday is the government sector. Whether you look at GDP at market price or GVA at basic price, the component which has increased is the public administration component, which is growing at 11.2% compared to 6.9%. And if you look at, government final consumption expenditure, again, it is growing at 17% compared to 2.9% last year. Maybe to some extent, 7th Pay Commission, OROP would have driven this. But I think what is happening here is that there is a lot of front loading of government expenditure from in the first 3 quarters, and there is also advanced payments of taxes. I think if you look at the indirect taxes, we have seen a substantial rise.
Yes.
So the CSO seems to have taken that, the 3-quarter robust growth in revenues as well as increase in revenue expenditure and extrapolated for the whole year.
Yes.
So if you look at 17% growth in GFCF,
yes,
it is much more than the nominal GDP growth, particularly when we are expecting the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio to come down compared to last year. So I think the extrapolation method seems to be a problem. But my guess is that these numbers are subject to large revisions when it comes next time.
All right, all right. Do you agree with that, Mr. Sharma? Do you agree that, as far as the GVA numbers are concerned, it's still in line with what was the prediction by various other agencies as well, including the economic survey. However, the GDP has just shot up, and that has taken everyone by surprise.
Yes, numbers are realistic, and I agree with Professor Bhanumurthy ji, because our estimation was 8.1% for the 16-17. But due to demonetization, we had anticipated that the growth will remain somewhere at around 7%.
Okay. Because
of the demonetization, 1 percentage point decline in the GDP numbers, because we calculated the average of the forecasting, that was 0.5% to 2 percentage points.
Yes.
So we took average of all the forecasting by the various agencies, and that was 1%.
Okay.
So we were looking at 7% growth rate for the current quarter.
Yes.
And there is surprise from the agriculture sector also. That growth was anticipated at around 4% for the agriculture sector. Now the growth is 6.6% for the quarter 3. And underestimation of the overall growth rate for the year 16-17. That was also underestimated. I think PSD chambers, according to various surveys by the PSD chamber, growth was at around 8.1%.
Yes.
Quoted by so many people from the corporate sector that we will be more than 8% for the current financial year.
Okay.
But government figures were below the 8.1%.
Not just government figures, even the IMF,
yes,
various other agencies as well quoted it much lesser, much lower
lesser,
than what we are seeing at the moment. If I could bring in Mr. Kumar at this point of time, the very fact that demonetization doesn't seem to have had an effect at all on these numbers, is that what you think is taking a lot of economists by surprise? They've left them really scratching their heads.
Yeah, I think so, but I think it should not have taken them by surprise, because to expect demonetization to have a concurrent impact, which is by which I mean that it was, the step measure was announced on 8th of November, and for that to have affected economic activity within the next 6 weeks was actually, I've been saying this all along, is actually expecting, is an unreal expectation, because there will be a lag effect to the demonetization, and I suspect this will come out in the fourth quarter of financial year 17 or in the first quarter of financial year in 2017-18. And as you can see from the numbers announced by the CSO, the fourth quarter GDP number is 6.8, and I think commensurate to that, the GVA at basic prices would be around 6% or so, which is a distinct slowdown from previous years. So there is an impact of demonetization, which is in some sense unfolding before our eyes. But nonetheless, given that, irrespective of what Professor Bhanumurthy said, the methodology used by CSO is exactly the same as it has done in previous years or previous quarters. So one should not at this point of time criticize that or use that to say that, look, therefore the GDP number is lower or higher.
Yes.
What we must say, therefore argue, is that the Cassandras of the world, or like Mr. Chidambaram or Professor Arun Kumar, etc., who had thought of this measure taking the economy into a downward spiral and into a recession, have clearly been proved wrong.
Okay.
The economy, because of the agricultural sector, because of the government consumption, expenditure, services sector, has taken demonetization in its stride, as it were. Some impact will come along, and that we will see in the fourth quarter and the first quarter of the next year.
All right. It seems like the government stands vindicated, Priya Ranjan, because they did say that we will see an effect. Even the RBI, for that matter, did say we'll see it, but it'll be very, very marginal. And in fact, just about last month, was it? The RBI governor did say that we'll see a sharp V. In fact, in the growth rate actually, and it seems to have come true. At least if you look at we are talking estimates, but still, if you look at the numbers, how it was predicted even by the RBI itself to now what it is.
Well, I don't think at this point of time, based on these set of data, one would come to any conclusion about, whether it's the government's claim or the opposition's claim getting vindicated or otherwise.
Yes.
If Dr. Manmohan Singh said that on a conservative estimate there will be a 2 percentage point impact on GDP growth rate.
Yes.
And if the GDP growth is now in the second advance estimate estimated at 7%, he could still go back and say that perhaps the GDP would have grown by 9%, there has been an opportunity loss of 2 percentage points. So, and similarly the government, as it has indeed, the Economic Affairs Department Secretary has already said,
yes,
and Mr. Rajiv Kumar is mentioning that the impact has, has been slow, if any, and it's not been much. I don't think either of the claims can be either substantiated or disproved at this point, taking on the basis of the GDP data. Because I believe that the GDP data, not this time alone, at all times,
Yes.
are not designed to actually capture much of the reality of the Indian economy.
Yes.
And the reality of the Indian economy is that there is the informal sector and the unregistered, untaxed sector is a substantial, I would say even bulk of the Indian economy is informal sector.
Yes.
Now that being the case, the way the GDP, the statistical system has been developed is that the data captured is from the formal sector of the economy.
Yes.
And even on the informal sector, what is done is the formal sector data is projected into the informal sector to arrive at some indicator of the sampling. After all, the GDP calculations are all sampling.
Absolutely,
of,
because I'm no economist to actually get into what exactly did the CSO do and how did they come to the numbers.
That being the case, at all times the GDP figures do not really reflect the reality of the economy.
Yes.
And so on this limited question of whether demonetization has had a impact and the extent, the magnitude of that impact cannot be judged from the GDP data.
All right.
So I'm not least surprised that the second advance estimate of GDP for 16-17, as indeed the first GDP estimate, puts it at 7%. But if you ask me whether it feels like 7% growth in the economy, I'm afraid it doesn't.
Absolutely, and I am coming to that, that this is what is perhaps adding more surprise to the numbers. I mean, this is why perhaps it seems to be more unexpected, is because of the fact that, the CSO has come out with these numbers, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be reflecting on the ground. Because if you look at the figures, auto sales, we were just discussing auto sales down 18.6% in December. You have cement sales for one down 8.7%. You got production which is down 13.3%. Somehow on the ground it seems demonetization has had an impact, or for that matter just consumption in general has had an impact, but that is not being reflected in these numbers. And I think that is why, at least to me, it seems like there seems to be a disconnect. And this is not the first time that people have raised these issues as far as the numbers that come out from the CSO regarding the GDP. Would you like to reflect on that? Do you feel there is a disconnect?
Yes, if we consider the rural demand is impacted because there is a lot of slowdown in the rural demand. Earlier, rural demand was growing at the rate of 8-9%, but the rural demand is now growing at the 3-4%. And people are facing a lot of cash crunch.
Yes.
That's why the lot of estimates came that growth will decline. But if you check the press statement, then the manufacturing sector is growing in the good trajectory, more than 7%. And I believe manufacturing sector is calculated on the basis of corporate earnings. That is more than 70%.
Okay.
The share is from the corporate sector. That is not reflected because of the share of the corporate sector in the manufacturing sector, and remaining 30%, which is I believe from the informal sector, that is on the basis of IIP data. I believe Professor Bhanumurthy can explain in detail.
Yes.
I think IIP was in the minus for the whole April to December, minus 0.05%. So if IIP is not reflected and the numbers are only on the basis of corporate earnings in the manufacturing growth rate, so that informal sector may reflect in the coming quarters.
Okay.
That may be the lagged effect.
Okay.
So at this juncture, 7% growth rate I believe is majorly supported by the agriculture sector, because agriculture sector grew at the rate of 6.6%.
Yes.
And agriculture contribution is 15%. So it becomes at around 1.9 percentage point addition in the overall GDP, which is equal to the anticipated loss from the demonetization process. If we take the average of the total estimates, 1 percentage point, that is compensated by the agriculture sector.
All right.
I think that's why we have have achieved this figure of 7%. But you are right that numbers,
Yes.
rural demand is not there. Rural demand is totally impacted. And if rural demand is impacted by 3-4 percentage point, then the growth of private final consumption expenditure is not in sync with the overall GDP numbers.
All right. Yes.
The reason why I brought this GDP estimation methodology is that, to say that, we need to be a little more cautious when we are reading these numbers. So if you look at the private final consumption expenditure, which we think it should have taken a big hit
Yes.
in the post demonetization, if you look at the rate of private final consumption expenditure for the third quarter, it has increased.
Okay.
Okay, compared to the previous quarter. And that is one of the reasons why I am saying that we need to look at the methodology before we conclude anything, I mean, against or for in terms of GDP growth.
And that increase in private consumption is in the face of the consumption, consumer durables and non-durable
Non-durables.
companies,
Yes.
corporates actually reporting a decline, volume decline in sales. So, so that is a point, quite perplexing actually as to how is it that, and that growth that the GDP numbers are showing, private consumption is over 10%.
Yeah.
Now in the quarter that where it is expected to be.
Yes.
But to come back to the question of rural demand, you see, in the first estimate when agricultural growth was put at around 4% or 4.8%,
Yes.
and now it has been revised in the second advance estimate based on the Agriculture Ministry's own revised estimates of agricultural production, where so if it is 6.6% now, agricultural growth, there is nothing surprising about it. Considering that you've had two bad years, drought years, previous 2 years, this year even if an estimate of 9% in agricultural growth or a double-digit agricultural growth, we know that there has been a bumper crop. But is that 6.6% agricultural growth actually translating into farmers, income,
Yes.
income in the hands of farmers or rural India, which is again translating into rural demand? I'm afraid not.
Yes.
So that is again there is a disconnect that you can
Exactly,
see between the reality and what these figures are suggesting.
Absolutely. If I could just bring in Mr. Rajiv Kumar as well. Mr. Rajiv, I don't know if you're hearing the what the debate has reached to at this point. The very fact that we understand that the agriculture sector perhaps is to a large extent added to this estimate of the GDP. However, if you see on the ground, the reality is quite different. Would you like to comment on that? Do you agree that there is some sort of a disconnect to what the CSO is projecting and what really is the reality on ground?
That's let me make 3 points here. You see, one, the CSO GDP estimates being not quite in sync with the ground economic realities has been a burden of all the song for all of us since January 2014 when these estimates were first released. But it seems that everybody, the multilateral banks, agencies, rating agencies, etc., have all accepted those numbers, and that's now become the norm for that. So I think that particular issue should be kept aside for a while, because there is no alternative to that except speculation and some anecdotes, etc. That's the first point. The second point is that on agriculture, I'm actually quite sort of amused and surprised as to how people are saying that agricultural demand has been very badly impacted, etc. If you have had a kharif crop which has grown by 6.5%, and in that kharif crop, your two major crops, which is rice and sugarcane, are not impacted by demonetization because they are generally procured by sugar mills or by government procurement agencies or rice mills, etc., whose credit goes directly into the bank accounts of the farmers. I'm not sure why people are saying that the farmers' incomes and farmers' demand, etc., has been impacted. Also, let me emphasize something that I've been saying for very long, that the rural economy is still not a 1,000 rupee economy or a 500 rupee economy. It's a 100 rupee economy. Those who've been there and seen it will tell you that informal credit markets have developed. informal credit lines have developed. There is thankfully no distress in the rural economy, and so therefore the demand for consumer durables, yes, has slumped, and that is shown in the auto sales, etc. But that also picked up for two-wheelers in the month of December. So this rural demand thing, I'm not sure where people are coming in from. Final thing, the final point that I wanted to make is that again, that's something which I've been saying for a while, is that one of the impact of demonetization has been the formalization of the informal parallel or black economy, which means that a lot of transactions that were not being reported, lot of revenues that were not being reported, lot of tax returns which are not being paid are now in the formal sector. So while the economic activity, real economic activity has not increased or may not have increased, their estimation in the formal economy has gone up, and this is a once for all change that is happening in some sense. So to one extent it is, you can say that it is not real, but on the other hand, in terms of estimation, the statistics office cannot do anything but to take them into account.
Okay.
So therefore, so this is the formalization process which is now being reflected in these numbers, whether it is tax revenue numbers or it is corporate earning numbers. And here I must confess that people who say that the informal sector accounts for the bulk of this economy, I'm not sure. They might account for the bulk of the employment, but not certainly of either the value added or of revenues, because there the top 20% of our corporates account easily for about 60% of the sales, revenues and profits, etc.
All right, all right. So eventually what I would like to ask is, will these numbers hold? Priya, Ranjan, do these numbers, do we see these estimates, maintaining itself, or do we see a correction in the near future?
Well, these are advanced estimates, second advanced estimate. So you will have a quick estimate, you will have a provisional estimate, and you will have a final estimate. So by January 2018, not this year, when you will get some additional data points based on which you will have a provisional GDP estimate for this year. I don't expect, there is always a revision, and we know that even for the first quarter and the second quarter, the GVA numbers have been revised downwards.
Yes.
And there could be some revision, but I don't see that in terms of these numbers, there is going to be anything that will be dramatic in terms of the revision. So these numbers will stay, but the question that remains is, does it feel like a 7% growth? That is the question. It doesn't.
Okay.
So the disconnect between the reality and the numbers will always be there.
Okay.
So do the numbers really reflect the reality? No, they don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Kumar's point that demonetization should have led to increase in the formalization of informal sector. I think that should be one of the major outcomes of the whole demonetization measure.
Yes.
But my point is, like, if you look at the GVA numbers, I would expect that the two major subsectors within the services, that's a trade, hotels, transport and communication. And other thing is the financial, real estate and professional services. These are the two major subcomponents where you should have expected a large informal sector, particularly in the wholesale and retail trade. That sector growth rate compared to last year, it is coming down from 10.7% to 7.3% in the trade sector. And the financial sector, if you look at it, it's coming down from 10.8% to 6.5%. So when before these numbers came, I was telling to the journalists that these are the two numbers that we need to really look at, and I'm expecting that a much higher growth compared to what we have seen in the past, because we believed that demonetization should reduce the informal sector. So, but what I am seeing here is that particular two segments, there is a dip.
Yes.
But on the private final consumption expenditure, there is an increase. I think that is the disconnect, and that's one of the reasons why I'm saying that we need to be a little more cautious to draw any conclusions from these numbers. I think we need to wait and watch.
Yes.
I'm sure there is going to be positive news, but I think from these numbers, I think we need to be a little more cautious.
All right. I think we'll have to leave it at that. That's all the time I have for the moment. But yes, we do agree there is a disconnect but we are positive that at some point we get to see the real picture that will eventually emerge. Let's, like we are saying, these are advanced estimates. So, I mean, we can't take it, as the truth, as the fact that remains. But nonetheless, the government, of course, claims it stands vindicated. The demonetization effect has not had any impact on GDP. So at the moment, at least, the government, of course, is, breathing a huge sigh of relief, is what we can say. Thanks so much for joining me on this debate here. Thank you so much, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, joining us from the capital as well. That's all the time we have for you on The Big Picture. Thank you so much for joining me for this.